I'm Shayna Mace, Editorial Director at BRAVA magazine. Today we're going to talk about the ties between financial wellness and mental health and share some community resources as well with you. Today's format is going to be a 35-minute panel discussion, and then we'll also have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. I want to remind you on your screen, there are 3 dots underneath your video screen. If you click on that and click on pop out, that is how you can actually answer your question for our chat at the end of our panel discussion. So today we're going to meet our panelists. We have 4 women today with us. First of all, we have Amy Crowe. She is a personal finance expert with 20 years of experience in writing, speaking, and educating about money. Amy is passionate about illuminating the connection between mindset and money behavior, and she leads Summit Credit Union's award-winning signature community financial education programs, Project Money and Project Teen Money, which you have probably heard of before. Next, we have Myra Mcnair, who is owner and founder of Anissa's Family Therapy and a marriage and family therapist and trauma specialist. Myra has specialties in infant mental health, parent-child attachment, marriage counseling, trauma-informed practices, and cultural interventions. Next, we have Sarah Compagna, who is Managing Vice President of Financial Empowerment at Summit Credit Union, where she supports and develops her team of financial educators and coaches. She also oversees Summit award-winning programs, including Financial Wellness for Employees, which is a workplace financial wellness program, Project Money, a public financial behavior change program, and Project Teen Money, a high school peer education scholarship challenge. And finally, we have Anna Moffett, who is the Executive Director of the Dane County chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or Nami, the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans impacted by mental illness. Anna's goal as Executive Director of Nami Dane County is to build on the strong tradition of advocacy and support for people affected by mental illness. So now that we have met our panelists, I'd love to turn it over to Amy Crowe here with Summit Credit Union. I also wanted to remind people that we are having a giveaway at the end, so please stay tuned at the end of our panel discussion as well. So Amy, take it on.
Thank you so much, BRAVA, for providing this virtual Empower Hour luncheon for us to talk and bring together the financial industry as well as the mental health industry to talk about the connections between money and our mental health. The last 19 months, let's just take a deep breath in and out, right? We have had so many challenges, with our mental health, I just can't tell you the ripple effect that this is going to have for years to come on women in our community, and everything from social distancing, right, to working from home, to school from home. And I know many, many kids are back in school now. That's kind of changed the environment yet again. We've had to pivot. We've had to make these decisions. We've been caregivers for our parents, for our kids, and for our families throughout this time. And so we've seen a lot of change, and that affects our mental health. That affects our finances. And so we're hoping what you gain from this session today is we're hoping to give you some action steps, but most importantly, we want to give you some resources. These ladies on this stage are a wealth of knowledge and experts in their industry, and I'm hoping that you have a paper and a pen, and of course we have the chat open, so please put your questions in the chat along the way. So Sarah, I'm actually going to start with you, because when we were talking about this topic together, we really wanted to kind of paint the picture, and you had some really interesting stats that I want to share with the audience. These were really high in my opinion. Could you speak to these stats to kind of set a baseline for our conversation today?
Absolutely. We've known that financial stress has been an issue for Americans, for consumers, for quite some time. But as you painted, Amy, the COVID pandemic has significantly increased that stress for people. So the statistics on the slide are showing 67% of Americans are not financially healthy right now. And that percentage goes back to April of 2021, so we can only guess that percentage has increased. So knowing that 72% of Americans are experiencing some sort of financial stress, it tells us that chronic stress can show itself in many different ways, from mental health to compromised relationships to compromised work performance and even addiction. So our financial wellness team at Summit Credit Union has done a lot of research and looking into the emotions, feelings, oftentimes trauma that is associated with money, and so we realized how connected mental health and finances really are.
Sarah, you used the term financial wellness. For those in the audience who aren't familiar with that term, kind of tell me a little bit about what it means. And I know during our prep conversation, you wanted to share the 8 wellness dimensions and kind of how they connected to that financial wellness. So I'm going to bring up another slide for everyone so that they can see it.
Yeah, so financial wellness, right? It's this term that everybody is hearing right now, but what does that actually mean? And so our financial wellness team at Summit Credit Union really defines it as how you feel about your money and what you do with your money. We look at it from, do you have the capacity to handle day-to-day financial challenges so that you can make choices with your funds to live an enjoyable life, but also be able to absorb a financial shock. A piece of that is also knowing that you're setting goals, that there's something you're setting out for yourself to try to reach, and that you're on track for that, or at least you have a plan to get on track for that. So that's a big thing, right? Like, where do you start with that? It's a moving target. So our team looks at the 8 dimensions of wellness that was developed by Rudiger's university professor, Peggy Swarbach. And really, we look at these 8 dimensions that you can see on the screen that I'm gonna list, which is intellectual, emotional, physical, social, occupational, financial, environmental, and spiritual. And the reason we like to look at this is that when you're living your life and planning your life, these are the things you're interacting with. But often what people don't realize is that the 7 elements outside of financial are really impacted by financial. So I want to give an example. If you take up running, maybe running for you is a physical activity, but you started doing it for a social thing. Maybe some coworkers are wanting to run a 5K. So now you are running with a group, so it's adding a social element. Maybe you're running outside, so you're getting into the environment. So you can kind of see how one activity is now bringing in these other dimensions. But what's the cost of that? Is there an entry fee for that 5K? Do you maybe need some new running shoes? Are you eating healthier? All of those things take an impact to your finances. And so that's really what we look at when we're helping our members is how are you planning your life? But then how are you also planning the financial elements to achieve that in your life?
Sarah, you bring up a really good point, and I know when we were prepping, Myra, you brought to our attention this other kind of dimension of something called the social determinants of health. And it was kind of an aha moment for me because I'm so steeped in the 8 dimensions of wellness. I'd love for you to explain what these are and then how they actually kind of tie in a little bit and how they're also interconnected.
They really are. Yeah, social determinants of health are basically non-medical factors that really influence health outcomes. And these are really like conditions on like where people are born, live, where they work, and where you age at. And so these are kind of some areas, and so that's like healthcare, and that's really like having access to healthcare, health insurance, really even having health literacy, right? Neighborhoods and environments, that's around, housing, accessibility, also the environment, like what is your air quality, what is, your access to food in your neighborhood, what is the pollution there like, what is the water quality, and then education is around early childhood access, education for like higher degree type education. And then social community, right? That's really about like policy and around public kind of like engagement, and also like things like incarceration, and some bigger social aspects and policy things that really affect people. And then there's the economic stability, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about, today, and like how that affects us. And that really affects so much of our lives. It affects our housing. It affects our food access. It also affects and leaks into like the healthcare and childcare. And what we do know is that when women have economic stability, that we have a lot of independence, that we have a lot of say-so in our lives, in our situations. We know a lot of times that women are in domestic violence situations, and a lot of it is so tied to economics. And so it's also tied to our mental health, right? Is that when we don't have the financial resources to do the things that we need to do for ourselves and our families, that is a major stress on our mind. And it causes a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry.
Which is why I want to bring Anna into the conversation. What are you seeing in terms of our community mental health? There was a lot of mental health things going on prior to the pandemic, but we're talking about it a lot more. We're learning to identify things. So what are you seeing out there in the community right now?
Well, I'm glad. I just want to preface it with that there were a lot of things going on prior to the pandemic. So we were seeing a steady increase in people identifying as having mental health conditions, more, elevated rates of anxiety and depression, and that's kind of combined with difficulty accessing providers. So what we're seeing now with the pandemic, it just grown exponentially. There are more people. In fact, I was just looking at a study through the Kaiser Foundation that identified that women in that poll, 55% identified as having increased depression and anxiety. So that's a really significant amount, especially that we know already 1 in 5 individuals do identify with having a mental health condition. So again, it's growing, the number of people who are struggling. And so what am I hearing and what am I seeing? We have a lot of calls for people that are struggling with substance use, the alienation, they're worried about their children, and how are they able to seek services for support. And so I'm very excited that we can talk about that today, because there are a lot of things out in the community, and I think once people learn how to access them, we're really going to be improving lives and saving lives.
Well, and we're going to make sure that we close the session out with some resources, so ladies, think about that. But I keep hearing this term out there, it's a she session or a her session, and I think it's a super interesting point for us to bring up, because if we have these 8 foundations of wellness that we're looking at, we have these social determinants, and everything's kind of intertwining with itself, right? Myra, I want to show some statistics that you shared with us, because they're really very interesting to me. So could you break these down for our audience? Because I think it really paints a good picture of what's happening during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, when we're talking about that economic stability, right, and we're looking at how many women have left the workforce over the pandemic, we're talking about 2.3 million women have left. And I think we've all noticed it, right? Like when we go out, like there's just not as many people in the workforce when we go out, whether it's restaurants or wherever that may be. And a lot of that is because, we can't do it all, right? We cannot take care of our kids while they're in the house and not have a child care, or even like a lot of child cares were closing because of COVID. So it wasn't really stable child care, right? And so we've noticed that 27% of women have quit their job to care for a child or family member. And then 42% have reduced their work hours, right? Because maybe they have some other resources or family members that can help. And then you can look at really the data with fathers, right? And we know that it's less. And so it really has been a she pandemic, right? We have, as women, have really carried a large load. And this really increases our stress, right? Because we're carrying on more, we have more responsibility, we're carrying it in a different kind of way. And so how do we cope with all of this stress, right? How do we acknowledge that we have it?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because it's not only the unemployment that hit with all of the shutdowns, right? And then we didn't have control over that. And then we had to figure out the flex learning, right? How can we work from home and help our kids, or the isolation that we were feeling being alone in our houses, right? That affects our mental health. When we're talking about that economic stability, I think that there's some really interesting statistics too, because, and Sarah, I want to bring you in on this one, because I know that you have a little bit of experience in this. Women, whether it's Asian, white, Black, Hispanic, even Native American women, each one of us is making a different sense on the dollar compared to men. And so let's talk about that, because it's such an interesting point. We had these things prior to the pandemic. They're even exacerbated, even so much more in the pandemic. So let's look at these statistics, Sarah. Kind of walk us through and what the impact over our lifetime might be.
Yeah, really great things that you're both talking about. I want to acknowledge that we know that COVID impacted women in two key ways, right? The reduction of workforce with the 2.4, 2.3 million women that are missing from the workforce. But then we also know that they have been hit harder with psychological impacts of COVID, more so than men. Not saying that men haven't been impacted, but it's because of all of the things that you just listed. And then on top of that, Amy, we still have a gender pay gap. So that is creating some sort of mental stress. We have that, we're carrying it all the time, whether we realize it or not. So Amy, you mentioned the difference in the pay gap, which is on the screen. So anywhere from 82 cents on the dollar, 87 cents on the dollar, down to anywhere 55 cents on the dollar. You know, working in the financial industry, I've had people say, well, isn't that just a few cents? Which I have my opinions about that, but I was in a talk recently that someone shared. So when we're looking at the 82 cents on the dollar, when we look at that statistic, for an average working full-time woman, that equals about $500,000 of financial impact in your lifetime.
Wow.
That's pretty significant. So we know that we're still facing significant mental challenges when it comes to economic stability for women.
And I think that's manifesting itself in how we feel, the emotions, our interconnectivity with people. And then with the pandemic, you know, I know we're starting to open things up and see our friends again, right? I think it's wonderful. But Anna, I want to bring you in because I want people to be able to identify habit changes or behavior changes that they might have seen in themselves or that they may see in their loved ones or even their kids, that they can start self-identifying. So you shared with us this slide, and I kind of want to just, you know, share us your thoughts on what we can start looking for.
Definitely. So, you know, our mental health will impact the way that we think, the way that we feel, and then also how we behave. And so I think it's important, as you look at the graphic, to be able to identify and be looking at, like what Amy is talking about, what can we be seeing in other people that may alert us that there's something going on. And so, you know, I think overall what we would say is if you're seeing a drastic change in behavior for an individual, so if someone is very extroverted but then is pulling away from friends and family, even within, you know, the realm of social distancing, that would be an indicator. I think too, something that we tend to normalize in Wisconsin in particular is the use of alcohol because it's so prevalent. And we sort of legitimize, oh, have a glass of wine at 3 o'clock, and that's how you wind down. That, you know, if you're seeing an increase that you're using alcohol or other drugs more and more, obviously that's a concern for somebody because you could be self-medicating. And then I think too, a big indicator again is looking at those physical habits that you have, withdrawing from exercise, sleeping too much, not sleeping at all, and being able to identify that with yourself. And so I think it's really important if you're caring for others, but even thinking about yourself and doing those weekly check-ins and monitoring that and making sure you're thinking about, you know, are there habits that I have changed, and could it be related to the fact that I might be struggling with a mental health condition?
And that can manifest itself in a variety of different ways, like you just said. And so sometimes I kind of feel like, you know, I love this saying, it says, it's okay to not be okay. And we're trying to normalize that saying more and more and normalize the idea of people reaching out and getting help. And so, Myra, would you share just a little bit about, from a therapist, what's the first step that people can take? You know, they've seen the symptoms, they've self-identified some symptoms. Now your role kind of comes in. What's that first step when they can reach out?
And I think the one big thing, and I think like you already said that, is really acknowledging. And I think that's really hard, I would say, for most Americans, right? Especially Midwesterns, right? That's a part of Midwestern culture. We like to say,
So polite.
I'm okay. You ask someone else how they're doing, they're supposed to say okay. You don't really want to know, right? And so, so I think one, like really acknowledging that we're not okay, like you were just saying. And so that's really hard for, I think, our culture in general, the Midwestern culture. And really coming to terms to that, right? And then really kind of normalizing that it is okay to reach out for help. But there are a lot of different things you can do. So there's going to see a therapist, someone like me, right? But then there's other things like, your physical health, we know that exercise is really tied to your mental health, right? So exercising, getting those really good endorphins going, really increasing those serotonin and those dopamine things. So many people also got puppies and dogs over the pandemic. And I say those were really great dopamine releases, right, for people. And then also like the foods we eat, right, can really help our mental health. So food, all of those different things. And then really watching kind of like what we're overtaking and like maybe binging in. And I know for me, it was the whole Netflix during the pandemic, right? And that wasn't really great for my mental health, or really increased social media use in like Instagram or Facebook. We know that studies have told us that that's really, really harsh on our mental health. And so I think taking a really good look at what your habits and behaviors are, and some of them have just kind of gotten us through, right? That really isolating time, but really making sure that we're doing kind of all things in moderation, right?
Yeah.
Because then it can also really start to kind of really tear down our mental health and our self-esteem.
Yeah, and Sarah, I want you to weigh in on this too, because there's a quote that I kind of resonate with that I think you shared with me about a year ago, and it was, you can't always control what goes on outside, right? We're talking those social determinants, things like that, right? But you can always control what's going on the inside, and that's attributed to Wayne Dyer. And so I think that and I know you've had shared with us, people have higher debt levels because of the pandemic. There's been unemployment. They've kind of drained their savings accounts. Or on the other end, people have actually had a chance to save money during the pandemic, and they're not exactly sure what to do with it now because they've never had savings before. And so now we're opening up, people are spending. So I'd love your take on that, because how can we identify when we're not okay with our money?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we see a lot of the same things that Anna was talking about, right? When we're not okay with our money, we start to not participate in the same way that we used to. We might withdraw from social activities because we don't have the funds to engage with it. Or on the flip side, we have people who start to just binge shop, right? You might be filling that Amazon cart all the time and checking out. So we see it kind of show up in a couple different ways, emotional spending or withdrawing. So, but either way, you're having some sort of emotion about what's going on. So going back to that financial wellness definition of how do you feel about your money and what you do with your money. So you have to take stock, just like you do in other areas of your life, of how you feel about your money. How do you feel about your diet? How do you feel about my physical state? You have to pause and really have some reflection on how you're feeling, because it can just be kind of happening automatically on the sidelines. So we really recommend that you connect with somebody. Connection is so important. Start talking about it, whether that's with a trusted friend, a family member, or seeing an expert. Because once you can start talking about it, you can realize you're not alone. Most of us are having the exact same feelings or struggles in some way. And when it comes to finances, much like mental health, we are conditioned not to talk about it. And the best thing that can help us is talking about it. Go figure. So we say, connect with somebody and start to baseline where you're at. You have to know where you're at to start moving forward. And people can help you with that. We can help you set a plan. At Summit, we can help you with that. But it starts with a conversation.
It really does, and money's such a taboo topic. And that's why we wanted to make sure that as the audience listening in, no matter where you are today, we wanted to provide you with specific resources. So now is the time to get out that paper and pen, or to write it down on your phone, type it on in. I'm going to give some resources. And so, Anna, I'm going to have you share the resources that they can reach out to from Nami first and foremost. You know, they just feel like they just need a little help. What would you recommend that they do?
Sure, yeah, definitely. And I would just say, for us at Nami Dane County, I have found in my time there that we really are that first door for a lot of folks. And so it's such a privilege to be in that position to kind of walk people through to that first attempt for seeking support. So definitely we have a website at namidanecounty.org. We have a tremendous amount of resources there. We have a really nice online resource guide that's probably about 20 pages of different resources, and not just mental health, behavioral health, substance use, employment, housing, food pantries, all the different things that go with the social determinants of health. So that's a great resource. We're also very fortunate here in Dane County that we did just open the Behavioral Health Resource Center, which is a free resource that anybody can call. They also have an excellent website that you can visit, but you can actually get hooked up with clinicians who can really help build that first relationship with providers, or maybe even provide that emotional support. So that's a free resource. You don't need insurance, you don't need a diagnosis. And also too, in Dane County, we have comprehensive community services, and that you do need to have Medicaid to access that and a mental health diagnosis, but they're really great about getting people connected to that. And then of course, for individuals who may be experiencing a crisis, we have the 24-hour Journey crisis line, and the number is on the screen, as well as the suicide prevention line. And then also we do have the option of texting 741 if you're somebody who would prefer to text to get support. So we're very fortunate to have these different resources, and I just, in my role, I've been so pleased with Dane County continuing to put a spotlight on mental health, and not just talking about it, but taking the next step and doing something and funding these different programs that we know are desperately needed now and will be needed in the future as well.
So tell me about the texting option again. What was it? You can text
It's
what?
you can text it's 741, and then you can just text whatever you want. You can text help, but then you'll be hooked up with a clinician who can work through that crisis.
Oh, that's amazing, because so many people are on their phones now, right? I think there's so many barriers to us reaching out for help. We're working full time, even if you have a break in your workday, you can reach out via text, or you can leave a message for somebody. That's why, Myra, what resources do you have? And you have to plug your website as well during this time. But what are some resources that you can share with folks?
Well, I know our agency, we are here in Madison, and we serve Wisconsin and Dane County as well. Our website is anisastherapycenter.com. And so we really provide, marriage counseling, family counseling, mental health, individual, and then also substance abuse counseling. So we have a lot of people, a lot of different clinicians that specialize in different areas.
And you have virtual appointments too.
Yes, yeah, we have virtual appointments and also in person as well.
Well, one of the statistics that I hear so often is that one of the reasons for divorce is money. And so when you talk about marriage counseling, I see a tie between meeting with a therapist for the marriage counseling, but then Sarah, bringing you in to share some resources that Summit Credit Union has. It can be hard when you have, a couple sitting in front of you and they disagree about money. So I definitely want you to touch on that as you're talking about the other resources that Summit has, and just kind of talking through how, that works.
Yeah, our Summit staff helps members every day with different scenarios, and oftentimes we do joke that we've kind of turned into counselors a little bit, because so much emotion, as I mentioned earlier, comes out through financial conversations. Amy, I think you hit it on the head. Our Project Money program, I think, really highlights some of the challenges that couples have with money as we document that journey over 8 months. So the resources that we have on the screen, definitely check out Summit Credit Union's website, which is summitcreditunion.com. I suggest going to /Money Smarts, where you can check out all of our Project Money stories and blogs about the families' experiences, the challenges they've had with each other as they try to work through their financial situation. But we also have a wealth of webinars and podcasts on our website, again, under the Money Smarts tab. And all of those resources are completely free. We have worksheets and a ton of resources completely free, so check it out.
All right, so you had your paper and pen for the resources. Now what we wanted to make sure that you did is create a little bit of reflection time and some action steps based on everything that we've talked to you about today. So it's always good that when you go through one of these sessions, I'm sure you've taken some notes. What are the action steps that you're going to work on over the next 24, 48, 72 hours? So as we kind of wrap up a little bit, I'm going to ask Myra, what are some action steps that you would encourage the audience to have on their list of things to do?
Yeah, I think definitely checking in with yourself, right? Seeing what your symptoms are like, anxiety, depression, so many of those things are carried in our body, and especially as women. I think that we just know kind of I got to get this done, and then we hold the stress in our body. So it can show up as headaches, stomach aches, a lot of other things, right? So really checking in with yourself, taking time to really create a self-care plan. Right? So what can you do for yourself? How can you take care of yourself? We have a list of what we do for our kids, what we do for others, but what are we doing for ourselves? And then I think also really meeting with someone at Summit Credit Union, right?
that's so sweet of
I
you.
think that should be a part of every woman's plan, right?
I don't even need to share advice then.
Boom, right there. So I really think, right, we can't do this alone. And we don't talk about money. We're not raised. I have so many funny stories of listening to older women and giving me advice when I was getting married about how I should handle my finances. There were so many funny stories, like hide your money, set up a secret account, do all these things, right? And it's really hard to know, like, what do you do as a woman when it comes around money? And it can be really stressful. And so I think meeting with someone at Summit would be a great thing to do. And for everyone, your wellness plan is gonna look different because we all have a different walk. And so my self-care plan and what I like to do, I might like to do yoga, someone else might really cannot stand yoga, right? And running might be their thing. So really finding out what your self-care, what speaks to you, what gives you joy.
Sarah, what's your take?
I love that because mine almost is the same. It's really starting to talk with somebody and get a baseline of where you are financially. Now, that can be super scary though, right? It's like that thing that we keep avoiding because nobody wants to look at the reality. And we hear a lot with, oh, I don't want to form a budget because a budget's going to limit what I'm able to do. But actually setting down and writing out what you have and where you are is very empowering because it allows you to make choices about where you want to decrease or increase to align with what's important for you. So I know it creates a lot of anxiety for people, but my advice is to meet with somebody, set out your budget, figure out where you're at so that you can set a wellness plan to just take a couple steps towards where you want to be. And I'm going to echo what you said in that everybody's plan is going to be different. It's a journey. You might be great one moment and then you're going to experience some shock, and it's about how buoyant you can be through that experience.
Thank you for that. Anna, what's your take?
Oh, yeah. I hear all these great things. I shouldn't go last. I just kind of echoing and building on what Sarah is talking about, that I really think it's important as an action step is just to get prepared. I mean, I think one thing that we've all learned with the pandemic is life can change dramatically in a second. And so even taking the time to go to some of these resources that we've talked about today to find out what's out there for yourself or for someone else, because things can change and you could be struggling at some point because something unexpected happens. So just be prepared, and it's okay. Just because you go out looking for stuff doesn't mean something bad is going to happen. It's just you're going to be prepared if something happens. My other advice really would be, I know we have a lot of women on this webinar, and a lot of us are caregivers, to also be checking in with your loved ones and to really set aside time to take those emotional wellness checks and be talking about it. And I've found with children and youth these days, they are just, they love talking about mental wellness. They're much more open than I ever was as a child. We did not talk about that. That was off the table, but I just see with my own children what they're learning at schools and what they're talking about with their friends, that it's important for us as adults to continue that conversation with them, because then we can understand, it's okay to not be okay, and here's what we're gonna do if you're not okay.
Thank you for that. Ladies, I'm so grateful for this conversation, because here's why it's really become an aha moment for me. I schedule chiropractic appointments for myself on a regular basis, but I don't necessarily consider talking to a therapist, and so that's when one of my action steps is going to research therapists that would be a good fit for me. And I think that, I don't know if I need it right now, but it's one of those things where we're tapping into the resources, putting something in my phone, bookmarking a website for future use, checking out each one of your websites, looking and see, what don't I know about each one of these topics to be able to prepare for that. So thank you for the wonderful and fantastic conversation. And next, what I'd like to do is I would actually love to get some audience feedback, or actually some chat that we might have seen show up during our sessions. So what did we see?
We had some great questions come through. Thank you again to the panelists as well, and we're eager to have some audience questions now. So our first question is for Sarah. you talked a lot about being financially well throughout the panel discussion. So we wanted to know, how will I know if I am indeed financially well?
That's such a great question. And I'm sorry, audience, you're probably not going to like my answer, because my answer is that definition is going to be different for everybody. As Myra said, as I said, when you're forming your mental health plan, your financial plan is going to be different than anybody's as well, because that starts with taking stock with what's important to you. What values do you have? What do you want for your life? And then setting a plan towards reaching that. So if you set a budget item and maybe you want to spend on something, asking yourself, how does that align towards what I'm working towards? And if it doesn't, then maybe you're not making that purchase. So it's a journey. And I like to say, my team, my financial wellness team, we have a quote in our work area that we talk about, and it's, stop keeping up with the Joneses, because the Joneses are broke. And it's true, because what you see out there is what people are posting, and that's not always their reality. We're all dealing with something, but also you can't compare yourself to those other people, because what they're striving for is something different than what you're striving for. So it's a journey.
Marvelous.
Well spoken. So going off of that, actually, Anna, I was curious, kind of going off of what Sarah said, how can we approach someone if we think they are struggling with their mental health? Because we don't always know what's going on. We can see this facade or a veneer, but they might really be struggling. So how can we approach our loved ones if we think they are?
I think the best approach is to be direct with individuals, and I think just asking them, how are you feeling right now? Are you struggling with your mental health? And letting them know, I'm here to help you. Sometimes too, I find it helpful to just acknowledge if you're noticing something going on with somebody. So if you see a change in behavior, addressing it that way and just asking, is there something else going on? And do you need help, and how can I help you through this? I think it's also important too to not belabor the point and push things on people, but just simply say, here are some different resources that are available. I'll leave them with you, and always know that you can come back and talk with me as well. And then just making sure to do those check back-ins with people. But I think it's important to be direct and just say what you notice, and that, are you struggling with your mental health?
Thank you. So we also have a question about actually seeking help. So Myra, we wanted to know, where do I start to find a therapist? It can seem a little overwhelming, either for ourselves or a loved one. So take us through that process of actually finding a therapist.
Yeah, it can be really complicated, really hard. You look on Google and Psychology Today, and just a bunch of people show up. I think one really big thing is really figure out what you want your counselor, what kind of qualities or attributes or specialties do you want your counselor to have? If it's addiction, or if it's around anxiety, or if there's a certain type of treatment, really make sure that they are then specialized in the areas that you are really seeking. And then the other thing that you want to do is, if you have insurance and you want to use your insurance, ask your insurance company, use them. There's that 800 number on the back of your insurance card. I say use it, and let them know. And this is what a lot of people are always shocked when I say this, is that they actually know who specializes in what. So you can call and say, I'm looking for this type of provider. You can even say, I want them to be a certain kind of gender. I want them to specialize in these areas. And they will give you a list of therapists in your area that meet those qualifications. So I think that's always a place to start. And if you don't want to use insurance, then you want to make sure that you're finding some places that allow for either out-of-pocket or for a scaling fee.
Yeah, and you're talking about a little bit of that finance piece to therapy. And so we were curious about, how does one actually pay for therapy? Because we know that there are a variety of options. So could you take us through what those options are for being able to pay for therapy?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize that this is a part of your health care. So if you're insured, most likely mental health care is going to be covered. It is a part of our health care, right? It is part of our physical health. just, you know what I mean, as part of like we're a whole being. And so a lot of people are shocked to hear that. Also, if you don't have health insurance, some jobs do cover, they have like a EAP where it will cover up to like 6 sessions for free. So also check in with your HR benefit person at your job to see, hey, like what kind of benefits do you allow around mental health care? And then that place will also connect you with someone that will be a good fit with you as well. And then you can also, you know, unfortunately, there are a lot of clinicians that don't take insurance, and I do think that's something in this field that does need to change. And so many want you to pay out of pocket, and some people prefer to pay out of pocket, and if that's what you choose to do, that's always a way to pay for services. And then there are a lot of agencies like mine as well that offer a scaling fee, and so we just have people fill out a form, and people can say if they have any kind of economic hardship.
And I was hoping just to add to that as well, one of the resources, the Behavioral Health Resource Center, is a great place if you're looking to find out what providers are available and then what insurances work with those providers. So they're very helpful in that, as well as Recovery Dane is another organization that can help connect individuals with providers that accept their insurance, because that can be a huge barrier and frustrating.
Very.
So going back to something else that was discussed during the talk, Sarah, I was curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on the gender pay gap that you talked about. We were curious as women, what can we do to lessen that in our own career trajectory?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple things come to mind. When we talk about the gender pay gap, in what I've read and kind of learned through our discussions is that it comes down to women sometimes not understanding their worth or feeling comfortable asking for their worth. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice that we have for women dealing with the gender pay gap is being able to negotiate your salary. That is something that women, I think in a study said like 1 out of 4 women will negotiate their salary when accepting a new job. And that is something that men more consistently do. So that is the first tip is have that confidence, do some research, know your worth, and be okay with asking or having some sort of negotiation. The worst they can say is no, right? But at least you put it out there. So that's one thing we can all be doing for ourselves is understanding our worth and asking for it. I would also say that in meeting with women, we come to find that a lot of them are not taking advantage of their retirement options through their employer. A lot of them say, well, my spouse or my partner has it, so I don't need it. But it's really important that for women that we are taking advantage of those for ourselves, but also that there could be free money you're leaving on the table. So many employers offer a match if you're contributing to 401k, and so that would be the other tip of advice. As a woman starting a job, or if you're working and you have that available to you, make sure that you are taking advantage of that match. That is free money that you are leaving on the table if not. And then outside of that, it's starting to be able to take a little bit more risk. So starting to save if we don't have any savings cushion or emergency savings account. But then if you do have a little bit built up, start dabbling in investing. One of the things, again, that women tend not to jump into as much as men is investments. And so the more that we can start building our wealth, the better we're gonna be. So those would be some tips.
Well, let's talk about building wealth for a minute. We had a couple questions come through on emergency funds. So very important, as we've seen through a pandemic in particular. So we had a couple questions on, do I really need an emergency fund? And if so, how much should we be putting in these emergency funds?
That's a great question.
And I know the answer is different for everybody.
It is going to be different for everybody. But so yes, an emergency fund is important. Kind of going back to having a mental health plan, a physical plan, a financial plan. One of those things should be setting yourself up for peace of mind, or back to what I had said of how do you absorb a shock. Things are going to happen in life. We're not going to set a plan and everything's going to just go smooth sailing, and that's just not the reality. The refrigerator is going to go out. You're going to blow a flat tire. something's going to happen unexpected. So the more that you can have funds set aside to deal with that and not truly be stuck in an unexpected and putting it on a credit card, really having a place to tap into to take it from, that's what's going to empower you in your future about owning your money. So yes, an emergency fund is important. Now, how much should be in it, I think has kind of changed over the years. It used to be 3 months of salary, then it was 6 months of income. Really what we suggest at Summit is to look at you have to have a budget, look at your monthly expenses. What are your non-negotiable expenses? To have a roof over your head, electricity, the non-negotiable expenses, and what does that equal to each month? Then you should be building to have that set aside for at least 3 months is where we suggest that you start. So that you know if you were put in a situation, you at least have 3 months that you could survive before looking at other options. So then where do you start? Sorry, I'm trying to answer all the questions.
I was going to follow up with that
Where
question.
do you start?
Yes.
Really, again, that's looking at your budget, aligning with your values of what you're trying to achieve, and then where can you make changes? And those changes might be as small as a couple bucks, $5, but it's getting in the habit of paying yourself and putting it aside and not touching it. And I've had people say, well, what's $5 for 12 months? What's that going to be, $60? What's that going to do for me? Again, it's the habit. So having that $60 when you have that flat tire, $60 is better towards that $100 tire than no money. So it helps get you in that practice, and it helps get you out of that cycle of putting it on a credit card.
I do have another follow-up question for you, just because we thought this one was interesting too. How does one get their finances kind of back on track after a pandemic type of situation that we have gone through? And you've talked a little bit about some of those things, but...
Yeah, again, I sound like a broken record, but it's coming in to meet with somebody. It's especially in this situation, a financial expert, because what we're going to want to do is understand what obligations you have, what you have coming in, and then looking at your credit and kind of where you're at and what options there are out there. We have members that have come in with a significant amount of debt. You can see the angst and just stress on their shoulders, and we're able to refi that maybe into a lower payment, lower interest rate, and just seeing that weight, that stress come off their shoulders, that they now have more wiggle room in their monthly budget, can make a world of difference in somebody's mental health and current state. So if you're looking to rebuild or looking to get a plan to regroup after COVID, it's really coming in and understanding where you're at with an expert so we can set a plan to help you get out of it or work through it.
Excellent advice. We were curious, Myra, and maybe Anna too, but probably Myra for this question. We had an audience question on appointment availability and access during this time. Sometimes it's a little tricky during this time, especially for mental health services. So our audience member was curious if you have seen that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so just to kind of give everyone like a good picture of what's happened over the pandemic as far as just people even meeting criteria to have a diagnosis. So usually in the US, it's 20% of Americans have like a mental health diagnosis. And now just over the pandemic, it has literally doubled. So it's 40%, it's over 40% of Americans have meet some type of criteria for some type of mental health diagnoses. So you can imagine overnight, basically, when you're thinking about it in 1 year, everyone's numbers have doubled and even tripled as far as like people that we're seeing. And so there are waits, and that is a real thing. There are waits in a lot of mental health agencies and clinics here in Madison, and that's unfortunately all around the United States. I would say get in though. Don't let it discourage you. Get on that waiting list. If it's an appointment that is in January, take it. I can't stress that enough. Like, just don't let it stress you out. Find some things that you can do that are really good and healthy for yourself. Sometimes it's easier to get into mental health groups, and that's always a really healthy way or healthy thing to do while you're waiting, while you're on the waiting list. So.
Yeah, and I would definitely add to that. I agree there are those waits, and I know for us at Nami Dane County, I mean, that's why we were started, because the services just weren't there, and so there's so much power in peer support. So coming together with other individuals with lived experience and really talking about the different challenges and the different tricks that you can use. So, not always just relying on clinical services, but looking to other alternatives as well to improve your mental health.
Anna, I know you mentioned briefly before this talk about children as well during the pandemic, and checking in with them, being able to seek services for them as moms, and family members watching this right now. What can we do for our children and families to support their mental health?
Well, like I had said earlier, I really think it's important during this time to schedule time to talk about your own mental health, and then also ask about your children's mental health. Having those conversations, for some people it might be daily, for some folks it might be weekly, but really coming together and normalizing those discussions and using the language. So using words like yourself, I'm feeling really anxious about this project coming up, or I'm feeling a little bit depressed because we just had to put our pet down, and introducing that language so that our children can start understanding those terms and how to talk about it. And I think that's so important, just on a general level. And again, too, for supporting children and youth, I'm not a big fan of making assumptions, but I'm pretty safe to say that we can all assume that our children and youth are struggling right now. And so really, again, being mindful, making those plans, finding out what's out there, connecting with your school, and making sure you have that connection with them as well and what they're seeing. I think that's really important. And I did want to share one great resource that I was just introduced a few weeks ago at an event. It's Got Your Back app. And it's a great app that's free. It's there so that youth can put in their squad, their people who they can go to if they're struggling, tons of different resources, crisis plans, and it's all on their phone, and it's free. So I was just so impressed by that. And I think, as parents, we all see how much our children and youth are on social media and using technology. So giving them a tool that they're familiar with is important as well.
We did have an audience member say, in terms of the checking in with people, I like what Anna said about doing the check back in with people. Sometimes people are not strong enough to reach out, so it's important for loved ones to reach in, as you say. So that seems to be a resounding theme of our panel today. Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up our discussion?
I feel just so empowered. Ladies, thank you so much for the information. I know I've learned something new. I have just such gratitude in you taking the time out of your day today to be with us here on this stage, and to thank you to BRAVA for creating this forum for the Empower Lunch Hour. So thank you so much, BRAVA.
Thank you again to Amy, Myra, Sarah, and Anna for speaking on our panel today about the ties between financial wellness and mental health. We'd like to thank Summit Credit Union as well. We also have a giveaway, as I mentioned at the beginning of this. So we will be posting the giveaway winners on bravamagazine.com on Monday. But thank you again to our giveaway sponsors, Biaggi's, EV & Company, Monk's Bar and Grill, Princeton Club, and then again, Summit Credit Union. And we will also have a recording of this panel discussion as well, also available on bravamagazine.com. So check back for that as well. And thank you for joining us today.